Thank you all for coming to join us this morning. My name is Cynthia Ippoliti, and I'm Associate Dean for Research and Learning Services here at the libraries. And I'm really, really excited to be able to present to you the inaugural, it truly is the inaugural, the Open Textbook and Open Educational Resources panel. I'm going to introduce our distinguished faculty members in just a second, but first I'd like to give you just a little bit of background about how we came here to today. So this project really started about a couple of years ago with a donation from Dr. James Wise, who is one of our library donors, who wanted to give us some funding to help us provide stipends for faculty to develop or adopt an open educational resource or an educational textbook, as we refer to them. And we were very excited to be able to have this opportunity, and so we put forth the call for proposals, and we were very excited to have about 7 faculty members total respond to the call. We have 3 of them with us here today, and it's taken a little bit of time to get momentum going and to see some of the projects actually come to fruition. But I'll be showing the library website in just a second that will talk a little bit more about the project and the ePress. And it was really interesting because most of the faculty members who decided to work on this project decided to actually write their own open educational textbook. And if you've written a book or an article or anything, you know that this is definitely a labor of love. It takes a lot of time, in addition to not only writing the textbook, but also thinking about how to integrate it within the curriculum. And so we thought it'd be really great to have faculty members talk a little bit about their process and kind of what they were hoping to achieve by developing their own open educational resource, and that's why we're here today. So I'll go ahead and introduce them in alphabetical order. We have Professor Tutaleni Asino, who has a PhD in Learning, Design, and Technology in Comparative and International Education from Penn State University, and his research interests include diffusion of innovation, adoption and use of emerging technologies and learning environments, mobile learning, design for mobile devices, indigenous knowledge, STEAM, comparative international education, and the role of culture in the development and evaluation of learning technologies. Then we have Professor Mike Schuster, who teaches business law in the Economics and Legal Studies Department. He is a registered patent attorney before the U.S. Patent Office and is also licensed to practice law in the state of Texas. His research explores how rationally behaving private parties can influence the scope of intellectual property protection and vice versa. And last but not least, we have Penny Thompson, who completed her PhD in Educational Psychology and Educational Technology at Michigan State University in 2012, and is now an assistant professor of educational technology in the College of Education, Health, and Aviation. Her research interests include online learning, media multitasking, and the use of instructional video. Her interest in open educational resources began when she looked for and could not find a good introductory text for her master's level Foundations of Educational Technology course. So please help me welcoming our panel this morning. So what we'll do is we'll have kind of a Q&A session with our panelists, and then I will go ahead and talk a little bit about our ePress site and our exciting upcoming program that will continue hopefully to build on the momentum that we've already achieved. So I will start with the very first question. I'm sorry I'm a little behind you, so it's hard for you to, don't feel like you have to look at me when you answer. But what led you to become interested in open educational resources? So who would like to start off first?
Sure, I'm happy to start
Go
off.
for it.
Well, with my background in patent and copyrights, I do a lot of research in intellectual property, so I was already well aware of the open source Creative Commons movement. So when I started to look forward to starting a 1-hour patent law class that had never been taught before, I started to look for texts that were going to be appropriate here. And what I was aware of and what I found on the market were $250 casebooks that were appropriate for a 3-hour law school level class. Then on the opposite end of the spectrum is you had 10-page pamphlets and things of this variety, but really there was nothing geared towards the undergraduate student that it seemed unnecessary to spend all of that money to get a, we'll say, overkill text. So I decided it was more appropriate for me to go ahead and just bring together my own text. Now, building upon the knowledge of all of what was out there for use already in the open source domain, I went ahead and pulled from a lot of what was out there, built it into my own text, and then added what I felt was necessary for my class.
Great.
I think for mine is similar in that it was driven by a desire to find a textbook that meets the needs of my class. But mine was also because I have a long interest in open education in general, of which open educational resources are just a component of that. I'm very much interested in education without borders, where we have students who are taking part in their own educational process, and just engaging cross-culturally and cross-nationally with different people. So for me, the reason for creating a book was to find something that brings students more into the conversation about how they're learning and how they're being taught. And then on top of that, I'm in an educational program, and most textbooks are usually, by the time you start using them, they're usually 2 to 3 years on the earliest out of date already. And what I'm trying to do with my class, it just doesn't really work. So for a class that's called Learning in a Digital Age, which is what I'm teaching, a book that's already 3 years out of print becomes very difficult to use. And on top of that, I can't really justify having my students purchase a book that I know is not going to be fully used for more than maybe a few chapters. So for me, I decided that I would create a book where I will welcome and meet my students and bring other people to the conversation about how they want to talk.
And for me, again, I was teaching a class, and I could not find a textbook that really seemed to meet the needs of the class. Actually, there was already a history of struggle with the textbook when I came here. One of the first classes I was assigned to teach was the Foundations of Educational Technology course, and they had just made the decision to change the textbook that year because the textbook that they'd used in the past just provoked an outcry from students because of turgid writing, and so they'd selected a new book, and the book was selected by the time I came, and it was an okay book, but it felt a little bit like Foundations of Ed Tech for Dummies or something. It was a little bit too cursory. So I wanted something in between that really dense, turgid old book and the kind of a little bit too cursory new book, and I couldn't find what I wanted. And then at the same time, of course, Dr. Asino was my colleague, and he was talking about OER all the time. So that kind of brought that idea onto my radar screen. So those kind of a need and an opportunity or an idea came together.
Great, thank you. How are you integrating these resources into your respective classes? You can go in the same order, or you can go ahead.
Well, so I had already, I'd been teaching this course for a few years when I started the work on the textbook. So I basically structured the textbook the way I had already been teaching the class. So it was actually fairly easy to integrate into my class because I'd either replaced a reading with the old textbook with a chapter of the one I was creating, or in some cases I had people just going out to a bunch of different websites, and in some cases I continued to use those as supplemental material, but I was also able to kind of pull the material from those different websites into a more cohesive chapter. So in a way, the integration for me was easy because I built the textbook around the way I had already decided I wanted the class to run.
For me, integration is a little bit of a challenge because I went out to create a book that's very broad that I knew that I wasn't going to be using all of it. And because I was writing with my students, it made it a little bit more challenging when to use it and when not to use it. So I made a decision a while back, I think maybe at the end of my first semester at OSU, that I will not use any more textbooks, and I will only use resources that are available for me online for free, or resources that the students can get from the library directly. So even if it wasn't an open educational resource, that they could at least come to the library and get it, because I didn't think it made sense for me to have them pay twice for the library cost and textbooks. So that's why I went with that. But as far as integrating it, for me, I'm still in the process of that, because the way that I'm working on mine is the students who take the class that semester, the following semester, they have an opportunity to write and contribute to it. So every new semester, the integration is always a little bit different, because I end up having more resources that I'm going to be integrating into the class.
Now, I was actually a little bit luckier. My integration has been fairly seamless, and I think that goes back to a similar point, in that actually while I was creating the class and writing the text, they were going on in parallel. Accordingly, if I wanted to lecture on patentable subject matter, I would go ahead and write the text, then record the lecture, and go back and forth. Mine's an online course. So I was able to match them up one-to-one to where I had exactly what I needed within the scope of the text.
Thank you. What challenges did you encounter during this process of developing and integrating the OERs into your courses?
I'll go. I think mine, the biggest challenge really is working in a group, right? And it's not, and we were writing most of our stuff during the summer, and my research and work is comparative and international, so I'm usually, in the summer, I'm usually in different places. So I was writing a book with my students while I was hopping between Namibia and Mexico and Stillwater, so that kind of made the coordination of that very, very challenging to be able to do. But it's, I think in general, just when you're writing something on your own, you have a little bit more control versus when you're writing in a team, and that back and forth and negotiating in terms of what should be in, what should not be. And I also have to get the buy-in from my students, because when I say that I really am interested in their perspective and we have to co-author this, it's one thing to say it, but it's another thing for students to actually believe that their instructor values that perspective. So getting them to the point where they feel comfortable that they have expertise to contribute was a challenge as well. And then for me, I also did not want to use the textbook until it has gone through review. So it was written by students who were in their previous class, but this semester, the students who I'm teaching now are actually reading that and providing feedback. So it's a complete iterative process, and because you don't have much control over that iteration, it slows down sometimes the integration and the control that you have.
And while I generally didn't have a great deal of issues, I did find one thing in drafting, and this was due to the fact that I drew from what was already available in the public domain. I drew from a handful of different sources and then made them my own for the text. Now trying to create a coherent voice to make sure the terminology, the phrasing was similar, was something that took a great deal of editing, and I would imagine you had the same issue with regard to a variety of student authors. That being said, for the overall benefit to students, I thought it was only a minor bump in the road.
Yeah, and I had a similar issue. I wrote the text by myself, but I tried not to reinvent the wheel, and some folks from the library here helped me find some resources that were also open resources, so that I could actually literally copy and paste chunks of them and use them. So again, trying to integrate them, which I don't think I have done yet. I mean, at this stage, the first edition of this textbook, you probably still hear multiple voices in there, because the writing style of the material I borrowed is different than mine. And, that's something that we can keep working on. But even just figuring out how to appropriately credit what, when I was taking a big chunk of something and pasting it into mine and then writing something before it and after it and maybe editing the grammar a little bit in there, it was even tricky just figuring out how to give appropriate credit while still, not having all these extraneous, this section was written by somebody else kind of markers in there. So that was kind of one challenge. The other challenge is that I just way overestimated my speed and efficiency. And, when I took this on, I said, I'm going to write this in a summer and then use it in my fall class. And, well, besides other things that I needed to do during that summer, there was also just kind of sitting there with glazed eyes in front of the computer screen trying to figure out how to get this organized. And the writing process just didn't go as efficiently as I thought. So actually last fall I had bits and pieces of a book to use for my class, and they were in messy Google Docs. Now this fall, the students are actually getting not the final formatted version, but they're actually getting a tidy PDF from me. But all of that is just, I was just over ambitious and over optimistic about how quickly I could get this done.
Now, following off of that comment, one thing that I found, and you may or may not have found this, was that using the Creative Commons website is certainly your friend. They have gone out of their way to say a CCO license means this, and it's in plain English. If you're not a copyright attorney, you could still read that and say, oh, this is the appropriate level of attribution I need to give, where I don't even need to mention that this was taken from someone else. So that's a real benefit to anyone who's considering taking on an open source text and maybe using or fully adopting chunks from other open source works.
Great, thank you. Next question. What new or surprising issues, you've talked a little bit about this, but what new or surprising issues came up during this process for you? So things that you might not have anticipated or something that kind of stands out?
I think for me, what I realized that when I was writing this, I was forced to rethink my class because now I'm not just recreating the class, but also I struggled between creating a book that fits around the class or creating a class that fit around the book that I've written. So that was for me was a little bit surprising and heavy to rethink my course in a lot more ways than I expected. I think I was a little bit more lazier when I had the textbook that was already created, and I was like, oh, I can just look at that and put this here and there. But now it's like, okay, I actually have to think a year in advance of how this class is really going to work and how are the students going to understand a lot of these materials. And mine is still ongoing, so I wanted to have a living textbook that is continually being updated, but that for me was a little bit more surprising about how I was rethinking and reimagining the class as a whole.
Now, one thing that I've seen that surprised me, though in hindsight is not terribly surprising, was that, and speaking purely from anecdotes, that students didn't feel that they were as invested in the textbook, either metaphorically or financially, because all they had to do was click and download it. Accordingly, I found some that said, oh, well, I didn't spend $100 on it, so maybe I didn't read it as much as I normally would have. So I've been playing with different ideas on how to present that, go to the behavioral economics field, stuff like that, on how to present it such that the students feel that they have still made that investment, such that that encourages them to read it, as opposed to going, oh, I've got nothing invested in this, so it's not a big loss if I don't take advantage of it. That sounds silly, but I think that it is happening, though I don't have anything beyond anecdotes at this point.
Yeah, I don't know if I've had any big surprises other than just again, anecdotally, my students have made a couple comments that they like the book, and so it's kind of like, I wrote this book and they like it. And what's also interesting in their discussion posts, and I actually feel guilty sometimes because I did copy big chunks of other people's open access work and paste it in, but when in the discussion posts, when they want to make a point and refer back to the reading, they cite me. And it feels very awkward to see that Thompson 2017 citation in the student's discussion post when it's like, I know that's pulling from a paragraph that I didn't actually write. So it's just an awkward feeling. I mean, I think I'm just the whole mindset of OER, I'm still kind of getting used to, because it just feels a little weird.
Great. And the final question, and again, you've touched a little bit upon this, what advice do you have for other faculty who might be interested in adopting or creating an OER?
For me, the initial part was to set up how I was going to go ahead and present the entire class, to where I had here are going to be my 8 or 10 lectures that I'm going to present. And then to start making the outline early on, where I was going to draw from a variety of sources recognize how I wanted to tell this coherent narrative throughout, such that it was making sure I knew exactly where I was starting and where I wanted to go and where I wanted to end, such that I could draft a coherent text or pull from a variety of sources and make a coherent text, as opposed to just going, okay, today I'm writing about patentable subject matter. Next I'm talking about patent litigation. It was better to have the framework set up ahead, which I imagine most would do, but I thought was a real benefit for me.
I would say even if your textbook is really basic knowledge that you know inside out and could recite in your sleep, don't assume actually writing it is going to be any easier than your academic writing. I mean, it's a different style of writing. You're writing for a different audience than maybe you're used to. You know, if you're used to writing publishable journal articles and now you're writing in the voice for your students, it's a different style of writing, but it's still, all the things that make writing difficult are still going to be there. So give yourself the time and the space and the permission to struggle a little bit with the writing process, just like you probably always do, unless you're a much better writer than I am.
I agree with both advices. I think for me, the only thing that I would encourage is to involve your students, whether the one that are in the current class or the one who have been in the class before. I find that for my students are the one that are actually pushing me, that I'm probably in some way the one that are sometimes holding them back and giving them the feedback that's needed. It's absolutely a whole lot more work, I think, when you're working with other people, especially when you're working with students. But for me, that's sort of the underpinning of the whole openness movement, this collaborative effort, this having the learners have as much stake in what's happening as much as the teacher. So I'm enjoying very much working with my students because we started from the beginning of outlining the sections, what we want in this book, and really discussing all of those. It wasn't me just saying, this is what I think you guys should write on. I think it was a genuine partnership, and they keep me accountable just as much as I would hold them accountable for it. So it's more challenge. It's definitely challenging to write with other people, but if anybody is thinking about creating one, I think getting buy-in and involvement from your students is a pretty good idea.
Great, wonderful. Well, thank you so much. Does anybody have any questions? Yes, Rebecca.
So you talked a little bit about student response to the text, but how are students utilizing it as far as, are they downloading? You said you gave them a PDF. Are they using it on their, I don't know, a Kindle or some kind of their laptop? Are they printing chapters? Are we using tons of paper here? How's that going? Do you know?
I actually can't answer that because my course is an online course, so I don't see what the students are doing. It's a good point, though. I mean, I do intend to give them a survey this semester, and so I maybe can ask that question, although they don't have the final formatted version of it yet. But that might be something that I will ask in the survey.
I think that's a good question because I don't think I'm there yet to be able to answer it. The way that we use it this time is that I put it all in a Google Doc where students can read it and give feedback and comments as they're reading along. But I don't know how many people have printed it out or how they're consuming it. I'm assuming that it's through a computer medium, but I don't have for sure.
Again, very anecdotally, my students have been reading just off of their screen. Now, I know that there's plenty of research that said that maybe that's not ideal. Again, maybe it's worth looking into ways to encourage students, if you prefer, that they print it and then take notes on it. Ways to encourage that, but I haven't played with that yet.
Yes, go ahead.
I want to just address that. I'm with the university store, formerly known as the Student Union Bookstore. And one of the things we've been asked by our vice president, one part of the Division of Student Affairs, which is the same division that hosts the counseling service and the ADA office, and we've been asked to look into providing physical copies of it for students that either can't read screens well or don't learn off of screens well. So if when you do adopt OER things, please let us know so that we can provide that access for your students if they do desire it. Also, we're kind of looked at, rightly or wrongly, as a clearinghouse for, we should know know what every single textbook is. The students want to view us, rightly or wrong, as the resource to know what every textbook is for every course on campus. And I know all of your students read your syllabus very thoroughly and know what textbook you're offering, but some don't, and they come to us expecting us to know, and if you don't tell us, we don't know.
So is there a process that we should use
Just-
or do we just?
When you're, it's the standard textbook adoption process. We're working on a website to make it a little more interactive. Should be up this spring. But just on your textbook adoption form, instead of the ISBN number, just have your textbook liaison person in your department fill out that it is an OER book and maybe how it's going to be distributed. If it's going to be through the D2L or Blackboard, whatever you use now, or if it's going to be a PDF that you email to, just let us know so we can.
Yeah, and the bookstore's been a great partner, and we've started some conversations. Our dean has started conversations with them as well. And so a lot of folks ask us, is there kind of a competitive relationship between the library and the bookstore in this regard? And that's by no means true. So we're really grateful to have the partnership as well and to be able to collaborate. Yes, Steve, go ahead.
I wonder if you could expand upon any type of discussions you've had with your department head. You asked if you had approval to go through with this, or if you just think it's part of your research process, and then how will your peers within your department treat this publication when it comes to promotion tenure time?
Well, our school head was actually working on her own. I mean, she's in our program Ed Tech, and she was working on her own OER resource, so that was not an issue at all for us. As far as, and that's an interesting question because I'm going up for tenure this year, and I did put a chunk of time into this textbook, and I don't really expect it to count as highly as a publication would have. But at the same time, fortunately, because I'm in the College of Education, Health and Aviation, education is big. I feel like teaching is valued. Maybe, I don't know if I could say that it's equal to research, but teaching is valued, and so I felt like this project was valued in my program.
And I think for our program as a whole, the education technology, we're actually trying to have our master use only OER. So as a whole, we're moving in that direction. So we have the support from our school head. But again, she's in our program, so she buys into that philosophy. But that's a very interesting question in terms of the tenure and promotion process, how that's going to count. And we don't have an answer for that in the college, but I just came back from the Open Education Conference, and that's a question that many people are asking, and I haven't encountered anybody who has an answer to that yet. I think most of the time we've been more focused on creating the textbook, pushing the diffusion and the adoption process, and just having enough that we are now at the point where we, I think, in the openness movement now are able to address some of those questions that we didn't think about earlier.
Addressing both points, I thought first, building the class from ground up, I didn't really look to anyone for permission on what text, if I wanted to adopt a $250 text or create my own. So I just ran with that. With regard to promotion and tenure, I proceeded assuming it would be essentially nil value. I don't have maybe some of the inherent benefits that they have. So if it benefits me, wonderful. If not, I assumed it wouldn't.
Yes, go ahead.
So, Steve mentioned this promotion tenure issue is maybe a roadblock to adopt widespread adoption of OERs. Are there any other issues that you see as impediments to adoption? And one specifically that I'm thinking of is the creation of the supplementary material, the tests and stuff that comes with all these textbooks that have been paid for by the big publishers. So is that something, it didn't sound like any of you had created that supplementary material, but since it was just for your classes anyway, you may have had that kind of material ready. Do you see that as a roadblock or any other big obstacle
think for me, all the issues that you raised are definitely obstacles. Anyone who teaches knows that there is benefit of getting a textbook that has question banks and guides and all these kind of things. There is benefits to that. One of the benefit is the time factor. You don't have to necessarily reinvent things. So that's definitely when you no longer have that, that's a challenge to the adoption process. The creation process is long. It's just like writing any textbook. I don't think writing a textbook, an open textbook, is easier than writing a non-open textbook. I think actually writing an open textbook is a little bit more difficult, more time-consuming because of the different licenses that you have to actually consider. So I think there's a lot of that, but for me, the biggest obstacle really is the knowledge of the process, being able to convince and communicate to people what open access is, what an open educational resource is, and getting buy-in from that, not just from your colleagues, but also from your students, who a lot of the time believe that if you pay for it, there's more value than that's free. So I think that for me, those are some of the diffusion and adoption obstacles.
And I think building off of that, the big issue, at least, and this is again speaking only from my experience, is going to be to make open resources viewed as a norm. I think that a lot of people, when considering whether or not to adopt an open source text, are going to go by the traditional viewpoint of, well, it may be better to go ahead and take the conventional route. If there ends up being a flaw in that route, well, everybody else is doing it. If they're viewing open source, they being potential professors who might adopt your text, if they view it as something outside of the norm that might be a red flag, in particular if they were to fail, then they might shy away from that adoption. So I think as open source becomes more of a, if still minority, part of the norm, I think we'll see a lot more adoption.
I guess I don't really have anything to add to their comments.
Any other questions? Yes, sir, go ahead.
I have a question about copyright and dealing with images that are standard. It's a process that's very basic for, let's say, undergraduate courses. And you want to have an image like that on your text, in your textbook. How do you go about producing an image that is expensive process, but somebody cannot accuse you that you are stealing from another textbook or things like that?
Well, I would generally suggest the easiest way is to simply find images that are already in the public domain, either images that are pre-1920s, that's not always going to work, or to look to explicitly open source images, things that have been made available under Creative Commons Zero license or some other Creative Commons license. If you have that, you already have the background to say, I didn't need to request these permissions before I went about it. Now, of course, you wanted to use one of my photographs, you're always welcome just to communicate with somebody, get it in writing that you have permission for this use, and proceed from there. But I think looking to the public domain is going to be the easiest way.
And I think it's becoming easier. In general, I think the open access movement is growing, and there are more databases becoming made available of free images and so on. So now it almost seems that every time a non-open software or system comes, that there's a parallel one that's open that you can use. So there's a lot more websites and search engines now that have free resource that you can use than before. But I think that is a legitimate challenge, because I would imagine that there's scientific diagrams that are copyrighted that would be harder to replicate. But for me, that's more of a technical limitation that as we keep moving, that's going to be addressed, because more and more people are creating these open resources.
Build off of that briefly. Of course, the diagrams in particular, certain fields are going to be really, really important. However, it's also important for all of us to recall that the facts contained in those diagrams are not copyrighted. Only the actual expression of those facts. Accordingly, if somebody made a flow chart that said, this is how, how the Krebs cycle works, something like that, you're free to go ahead and take the facts contained therein and make your own diagram. They don't own a copyright on the facts.
And I realize images is kind of one of my weaknesses. I do not use a lot of images in my book. It's very text heavy, and probably in version 2 I should probably try to add some. But I did do exactly that. I just made some of my own. I probably could have found a model of the attributes and Schifrin memory processing model out there that I could use, but it's just really 3 boxes and some arrows, so why not just make it? So that was kind of how I approached it.
And this is something the library can help with as well. So you would work with your library liaison to either identify those open resources that you could go ahead and just utilize free of copyright issues, or if we needed to get copyright clearance, we would help you do that. So currently with one of our authors, Tyson Oxner, who wrote his own book as well, he had a lot of those kinds of images, and we were working with him to actually get copyright clearance. So that hopefully will not be a barrier towards adopting some of those utilizing images or other copyright or potentially copyrighted material. Any other questions? Yes, ma'am, go ahead.
I would like to bring in that conversation the people that evaluate the dossier, even after the department gives you flowers and highly supporting you, there will be one after that, or maybe several of that, with question if this is an open source, like the value. Even if the letters would say we think this is equivalent to, in my experience, I served on a division level. We didn't see, even we thought that everything looked very well, but it went in further on evaluation, and they wanted peer-reviewed articles in education. And I thought it would be very useful, and the person that we, in this case, the person could have done it if somebody would have told him. And now, if I had the opportunity, I tell everybody, if you can publish that in an education journal, because there are education journals for every subject, and every one of them have different restrictions, or is much applicable, less applicable, and I think if everybody could do it and have one of those on top of whatever you already did would be much better. Just because I saw it and experienced it, and I said, oh, I can't believe it. He was the star person, and when he went away from the department, I said, oh, peer-reviewed publications is left. So it required another adjustment. Or bring him in the conversation earlier and be sure that they evaluated the same as your department and all the people that are agreeable with that.
And again, that's something the library is also looking at. Also, again, with Tyson's book, his was kind of the sort of the pilot for everything. We are actually doing peer review of his book with faculty from other institutions who are experts in his field, and so hopefully that will kind of help address some of those issues. And again, a lot of this is, as was mentioned, we're kind of working our way through some of these issues, but hopefully that will help with some of those concerns as well. So it might not be, as a formal process as something you would go through when you write a journal article, but it's definitely something that we're taking into consideration. So thank you for bringing that up. Any other questions? Okay, well, please join me in thanking our panel for their insight this morning. And before I do have to do a shameless plug before we end and everyone can enjoy refreshments. We did develop the ePress, the OSU Library's ePress site, if I can see. And so this is our official launch or debut of the ePress site. So we are, I guess, an official publisher. And I'm not going to go through every single link on the website. I will let you look at the website on your own time, but we do have the handout here, does have the information on the site itself and the URL as well. But here's information about our authors. And they're in alphabetical order, so sorry if I missed them, but there you go, yes. And then we have the books as well. And I do want to mention that, let's see, I will actually take Mike's. And so this is the format that the books come in. It's actually a fully downloadable book. It comes in what's called EPUB format, as well as a PDF file. We did collaborate with our Office for ADA compliance, and so we're making sure that the manuscript templates that the authors are utilizing are keeping those guidelines at the forefront, and so we're continually kind of evolving the model for how we do this. But we're basically kind of walking the authors through the entire process from start to finish. So this is new for us as well, and we're learning a lot as we go along, just as kind of they've talked a little bit about that. But you can see that you can actually look at the table of contents of the book, and you can then go ahead and download it or look at it. Yes, Kayla?
Are we cataloging these?
Yes, they are going to appear in our institutional repository because they are open materials, and so there are no restrictions on this information. Thank you, that's a great question. So they will appear in our institutional repository, which is also crawled by Google, so this will have broader impact than just showing up in our ePress site as well. Yes, Matt?
And what's the update process? Is new editions or versions, especially for those resources that are updated continuously?
That's a good question. We have not quite figured that part out yet, but that's something that we definitely want to, maybe once a year, we would put out a call for the existing ones to say, do you have any updates that you need to submit or anything like that? So otherwise it does get a little bit unwieldy to try to do it on a more frequent basis. And then of course you have the final shameless plug is for our upcoming program. So the pilot, and this is something we're very proud of, so these are the books that, the rest of the books will be totaling 7, so it's about almost 500 students that we've helped so far. We hope to help more. But the pilot phase of developing the OERs is done because the money has run out. However, we do, the Dean of the Libraries has graciously agreed to fund $500 in professional development funds for those people who are willing to adopt an OER. So if you can still develop one, you just won't get a stipend. But for those folks who are interested in adopting an OER, we have this program in place, and the little card that's also with you kind of describes a little bit the details of the program. We are asking for this first phase that the courses that are adopting the OERs are about 50 students or more, because again, we're trying to really get our bang for our buck. That's really why we're doing this, is to save students money. And so we, again, are happy to work with faculty to adopt these OERs. It's a little bit easier of a process because you don't have to develop your own from scratch, but it still requires quite a bit of significant time investment in terms of updating syllabi and your curriculum and all of kind of those issues as well. So if you click on the adopt link, which I will do, it will take you to, it will take you to the site that describes kind of what the process is for adopting an OER. And of course, the copyright licenses, the Creative Commons licenses that are associated with those as well. Does anybody have any questions about the website or the program? Okay, well, I wanted to thank everyone again for taking the time to be here with us today, and please let us know if you have any questions. And again, thank you to our panel, and have a great rest of the day. Thank you.